Lovely. So welcome to Delicious Art Classes today. This is for adult beginners, this particular class. So if you haven't tried pastels before, or if you've only done them a little bit and you want to get a bit more experience and understanding of them, this is a great class to learn a little bit about blending. So today's class is all about doing this coffee mug and bickies. And you should have your notes handy. So if you've printed this out, that would be really handy to have nearby. Otherwise, have the images, or one image at least, up on an iPad or a screen or something so you can see it clearly, because that's your reference image and that's the thing that you need to keep referring back to all the time to find your shapes and colours and everything. So I'm Jeanne Cotter and I've been teaching online for just this year actually with COVID, but I've been teaching art classes for about 4 years for adult beginners and specifically for pastels. So that's my love. I love pastels. I love the immediacy of pastels, and I love how the texture of them, that I don't need a whole bunch of mediums or anything to mix it with. You just use your grubby little fingers. It's lots of fun. So let's get started. I'm going to change the screen in a moment and pop over to the screen so that you can see my table and what I'm doing, and we will work together in this class. So what you'll need to have set up is some drawing paper and charcoal, and I'll switch my screen over now. Lovely. So what you'll be able to see in a moment will be my desktop, or table I should say, and that's where I've got all my equipment and papers and pastels and so forth. Normally when I work with pastels, I work on an easel because they're a little dusty, and so working on an easel allows the dust to drop down and fall into the little tray at the bottom of the easel. But when I work flat like this, you gather a lot of dust, and you can see there's dust here on my tablecloth from this morning's class and just from me putting my pastels there. So it does get a bit grubby, but it's a fun medium, and lots of different ways you can use them and things to learn. First part of the class I always do is a little charcoal exercise. So that is where we just do a sketch of today's picture, and you'll see on the notes that you've got a black and white version and a colour version. So what we're going to refer to for the first part of the class is the black and white version, because we're going to be doing it in charcoal. So the charcoal I have is a little tin of willow charcoal. Willow's fine because it's quite soft, and they come in different sizes and different widths and so forth. So I don't mind this little tin because I can pick and choose between thin long sticks or short fat ones, or if I've got a fat one I can break it into a shorter one, and that will give me more options, which we'll talk about as we move on. So have a piece of charcoal handy at least, whether that's a stick or a stump or even a charcoal pencil. They do come in pencil as well, and we will do this little sketch in black and white. This is also a class in drawing, so if you haven't done drawing before, then I also teach basic drawing skills just to get your picture set up and organised, and get all the proportions and everything correct. So this is a drawing pad. It's just a little art diary, and I like to use these because then I can put it away until next time. It doesn't make too much mess and it keeps it all in one place. You can see I've got dirty fingers because I've just put fingerprints all over my nice clean page. If you don't like having dirty fingers and you hate the feeling of chalky things, then you might not enjoy pastels or charcoal. But give it a crack and see how you go. So today our picture is just of a very simple coffee mug or coffee cup and a couple of biscuits. So this is actually a really fun one to do because you get to study the shapes and the ellipses. Ellipse is a circular shape, so it can be like this or like that or like that. So ellipses come in all different shapes depending on the angle that you're looking at the item from. So if this, for instance, was a bowl, then you could be looking at it from that way. You could be looking down into it. You could be just to have a little bit of the edge and a lot of the top, or it could be long or different shapes. But the ellipse is this circular part of any round object, which can be cups, bowls, vases, etc. And they're often a little bit tricky to paint or draw because you've really got to get the shape right for it to make sense. And so today's exercise is a really good little example of how to do that. What I like to do is just draw up an area on my page that fits into about the same shape as what we're going to be drawing our cup on. So this has just been designed to sit on an A4 page. So if you draw up a rectangular shape in around about a landscape A4 proportions, then you'll be, close enough, pretty close. Normally that is A4 is 21 by 29.7 to be precise. This is not, my whole page is A4, but I'm just reducing this down to fit into my page. So I've got a bit of space around it. Then what you want to do is grab yourself a ruler and find your halfway lines. So this happens to be 13 high, so halfway would be 6.5 on this particular one that I've drawn. So that's my halfway line there, and then halfway across this way as well. So that'd be 85 because it's 17. Your dimensions may be different depending on how big you have drawn up your little sample page. So we call these thumbnails. Sometimes people do small thumbnails, like only this big, onto their little sketchbook. And that's often just to figure out a composition of something. You might be doing hills and a tree or something, a house. You might see a scene and decide, do I want my house there, or do I want my house on this side and the tree next to the house and then the hills. So little thumbnail sketches are a great way just to kind of think about composition and how you would draw something up and where you would put different things. It's also a great way to practice something. So if I'm doing a painting of something, I always do a charcoal sketch of it first, because it's a nice way to rehearse it and just become familiar with the shape of everything. So the grid mark is going to help us to draw up this image. And the reason it does that is because we can now break this into 4 parts and look at each segment separately and just draw one segment. So I know sometimes drawing a whole thing feels a little bit overwhelming and you kind of don't know where to start, sort of thing. So I find the grid lines really help me with that. If I have a more complicated picture, then I will divide it up into even more grid lines. So I might end up with 16 squares instead of 4. And then I can draw each little square. And eventually they kind of all join together and they become parts of a puzzle. So let's begin on the top right section. So if you could either cover up all the other bits or just ignore them. So if I covered up all the bits except for that top right area, I'll just move this over a little bit. So I can't see anything else. I can't get distracted by anything else. I just want to focus on this section here. And what we're going to do is put a little mark on this midline. So see this midline in the middle. Where does the saucer cross over on that line? And I would say it's about that far in from the edge of my page. Just determining that by the distance I can see on here between the edge of my page and the edge of my saucer. And then I can come over to this grid line and look at the distance on here. So it's a lot further in on this line than it is on that one, because we're working in a rectangle and this is kind of round. So what I want to do here is figure out how far in is the edge of the saucer on that line. So that's my grid line. Now by eye, I can say halfway is about here. So I reckon that's about 1/3, maybe slightly more than 1/3. So if I break this grid line into thirds, let's say that's 1/3 and maybe that's 1/3, about, you know, it's all a bit rough. You can measure up if you want to be precise. I'm going to say it's about there. So there and there are my two lines that meet where the grid mark meets the edge of the picture. And then I've just got to do a curved arced line and join the two, which sounds easier than it is. If you hold your hand still, I'm left-handed, so it would be different from your perspective if you're right-handed. You might have to move your hand over, but I can just hold my hand and pull the charcoal around like that. So that's one corner. And then I can look at the same thing again with the edge of the cup. So this is a circle inside a circle, basically. They're the basic shapes. So if I look at this, the top grid line, the middle one, I can look at that and say, how far down inside this grid line does the cup go to? Not quite half. I think it's just about above half. So if this is about half here, I'm going to say it's about there. Okay. And then I'll just remove these other marks that I made before so I don't distract myself. So I've got the cup line here, and then this cup line, I reckon, comes in about the same distance. So it's about there on this other grid line. And then again, I can join those two dots and make a nice circular shape. So that's basically the one corner done. There's nothing else to worry about in that corner. We're just looking at lines at this stage. And then we've got to do the bottom, next one down. So the bottom right corner, same thing. How far in from the edge does the saucer sit? I'd say about there on that grid line. And then I can join those lines together. So you can see that this is not exactly circle. It's kind of a elongated circle. It's more rectangular, well, not rectangle, but oval. And then I can do the same thing with the cup line, although I think the cup line on here is slightly higher than halfway on there. So halfway up here would be there. So I'm going to say it's about there. So then I've got to join these lines. It's really way off, isn't it? And then when you do that, you think, whoa, that's so wrong. And this is why you need a kneadable eraser. These are wonderful. You can pull them to pieces, stretch them out, reshape them, pull bits off, and they're great for pastels and they're great for charcoal. And you can knead it into different shapes, and then you can rub things or draw with it. You can draw lines with it to get the whites back into charcoal, but I can show you that after. So just rubbed that bit out because what I want to do is round that off a little bit more. There we go, that's better. Cool. Then we can move over to the bottom left corner, and same thing, only now we've got a biscuit in the way. So the biscuit sits about, I'd say, 1/3 of the way in here. So the saucer would come under there, I reckon. So we can join up those two like that. Let's go all the way around and join this saucer up now and make a complete circle. So that's our saucer. And we just figured that out by where the edges are in relation to our grid lines. Then we can do the same thing with the cup. So the cup is slightly more than halfway if you're coming in from the edge. So I'm going to say it's about there. And so then we just want, bring that in like that. So we're trying to get as good a circle as possible. Circles are really hard to draw. They're a bit tricky. So if we end up with a slightly wonky cup, then I don't mind and it doesn't really matter. So what we want to do is achieve this outer circle and then the inner circle. They're the main shapes that we need to find within this. Now let's go back into the third or the bottom left quarter and find what else is in here. So we've got a little handle, and basically that's just a rectangular shape. So everything becomes a shape, and we just want to draw that. It comes about like that. It's got a slightly curved end on it like that. So that's our little handle shape. And then we've got biscuits. So this biscuit comes out from the side of the handle across here. And of course, biscuits are never perfectly shaped. They're kind of wonky. So it's perfectly fine to make a wonky biscuit. And that comes in there. So that's one biscuit. And so now we've got all the elements down inside this bottom left-hand quarter. And if you want to remove the saucer line from underneath the biscuit, then feel free to do that, just so that you can keep your lines nice and clear and see where you're going with everything. So then we'll move up into this top left quarter, and we can do the same thing there. We can find the edge of the biscuit, and that comes up through here and around and down there. So that's our bicky. And again, you can take the line out of there so that you don't distract yourself. So that's our basic shape for our coffee cup. So whenever you want to draw something, if you grid it up first, so put your grid lines on, and then literally just draw in all the outlines, it should technically work out and all come together. So next thing we want to look at is the shading. Now we've got all the basic shapes in there. When I'm doing shading, I like to use a shorter, fatter bit of charcoal. So that one I broke earlier. So this is a fatter piece, and I can lie it down on its side, and I can just rub it around like this. And what that does, it gives me a lovely soft kind of line. And it means that it's not a hard, sharp line. So it's quite soft. And you'll find you get the same effect with pastels. So if you look at your picture, your black and white picture, you can see that it's actually a darker grey on the right side there. So I don't know if you can see that, but it's slightly darker over here on the right. And so the reason for that is because the saucer dips down a little bit. You can see it's got a little dip in it. And because it dips, it's got more shadow inside it down through here. And then it gets a little lighter as we come around onto the left side. So the light, all these things tell us where the light's coming from. So the direction of the light is coming from the right side. Now, how do I know that? I know that by a couple of things. First off, it's darker on this right-hand side, so it's dipping down, which means that there's a shadow forming inside the saucer because it's away from the light. So down on this right side, there's also shadow cast by the cup onto the biscuits. So if you look at the bickies, you can see that they're darker inside here. So this big one, this first bicky, is darker underneath, and then as it comes out closer to the handle of the cup, it gets a little bit lighter just there. And this biscuit is quite light except for this bottom left section and the edge of it. So you can see there's a shadow around the edge of it. We can see the side of that biscuit, and it's a little darker around there. So that's three things that tell me where the light's coming from. The other big thing that I can see is the shadow in the coffee, and that's also dark round through here because that's being cast by the cup onto the coffee. Does that make sense? And then we've got a rim of light on the edge of the cup. On the outside edge here, there's a rim of light, which I'll put back in with my eraser in a minute. I'll show you how to do that. And there's also a light side inside the cup. on the left there. And the coffee itself is a grey. So we're just looking at the black and white picture. And then we've got shadow. It's beautiful. It's like a moon shape of shadow in there, like that. And you'll find as you do that and put all the shadows and the lights in, it starts to look 3D. It'll start to get that lovely 3D kind of look. And you'll be able to almost see the turns and the dips in everything. So we need to put a bit of charcoal onto the handle as well. So where the handle is closest to the cup, it's darker. Then it comes out into a grey, and then it gets dark again as it folds away because it's got like a soft turn at the top of the handle there. So now what we can do now is grab a finger and start to kind of push all this charcoal in. And as you do, kind of pull it around in the shape of the saucer. So I'm just pulling all the charcoal around the saucer at the moment with my finger and blending it basically. Now you'll find if you press hard, it might kind of take some of the charcoal off. Willow charcoal, this is very soft charcoal. And so it does tend to lift off quite easily. So the harder you press, the more it'll kind of push it all in, and it won't stay as dark as you might want it to. If that happens, then I can just come in with more charcoal, press harder, and put another dark area back in there, like that. Okay. And then on the biscuits, so we'll do the bottom biscuit first. That's the one on the bottom left because it's underneath the other one. Do that first and just rub that in gently, gently. You've got a bit of charcoal on there, just blend that in gently. And again, I've lost some of my darkness, and you can see that it's darkest underneath the other biscuit and, well, underneath where the cup is. So I'm going to put more charcoal in that area, and that will create more shadow. See how that's making shadow through there? And again, if I blend it, it just gets a little lighter and softer. And then this biscuit is lighter again because the edge of that one is hitting the light. It's really catching the sun or the light because the light's coming from this side and it's catching the edge of the bicky around the side of the cup. But underneath on the bottom here is where there's shadow. So you've got to start to look for shadow and light when you're doing this kind of work. It's so interesting because you see things you never thought about before. Kind of fun. Okay, so that's the edge of that bicky, which is also a little darker on this outside edge, and then it gets lighter as it comes around on top of that other bicky. So there the saucer and the bicky's rubbed in. And I'm just going to lightly touch the handle and softly push that in as well. I don't want to do too much blending on there. Then when we come into the cup, if you come into the center and kind of blend all of that, so we want to make a nice smooth kind of coffee or tea. So just blend it around in a circular direction so that we're getting that lovely feel of a circular coffee. And if you press too hard, you'll find that you'll, push all that dark in again and it won't be as dark as you want it. So then you, again, just come back in with your short, stumpy bit of charcoal and darken that off to get the shadow back in. And then I can just put a little bit of a sharp edge around that side of the cup where the coffee is. So, and on the rim of the cup, if we darken off that section there, then the light kind of lands inside the cup in here, and it gives me the impression of, the cup being exposed before we can see where the coffee begins. The other thing we want to do, and I'll show you that now, how to get some light back in here. So if there's sections, you can see there's little sections where there's light or light reflected on the edge of the cup and inside the coffee. So if you get your kneadable eraser, give it a break off a little bit and give it a knead. So we're kneading it like we knead bread. And what I'm doing is making like a knife edge with it because I want to draw with this edge. I want to get some fine lines in there. You could also make a tip like a pencil if that was easier. Let's try that. So you can do all kinds of different shapes with these, and then we can draw with it. So see there's a little shine around the right hand side of the cup, around the tip there. What I want to do is get that white again because I've charcoaled over it. So I'm just going to draw that back in with my eraser. When you do that, you'll find that it picks up the charcoal off the paper and ends up with a black tip, if you can see that very well. But you get all the charcoal onto the eraser, and that's why they call it kneadable, because then you're going to knead it in and find another bit that doesn't have the charcoal on, and then you can keep kind of removing the charcoal or the pastel with the edge. That's why I like a knife edge, because I can actually get more use out of a knife edge. It's a little bit longer. So see how I can get the light back in by taking the charcoal off with my eraser. And the light is just the white of the paper. And there's another little rim of light just inside where the coffee sits on the left there, and also inside the cup. So I've got these little lines of light that just go around like that. And it makes all the difference. You'd be so surprised by how much difference that makes to make things highlight. I'm just lighting up the edge of the biscuit here because that's where the light's catching the edge of it. And there's also a little shine just on the handle. I don't know if you can see it there on the right hand side. Just in here, there's a tiny shine. So I can use my kneadable eraser to get that off as well. So that's basically the first part of our class, and it's just our little charcoal exercise where we have a practice run, get familiar with the picture, get to know it a little bit better before we start to paint it and do it in colour. So it's a little bit rough, but I don't know about you. I think things look a little bit more natural or handmade if they have a bit of, roughness about them. Just notice that it's quite dark here in between the biscuits. So we'll darken that off a bit more. There we go, that's better. So let's get stuck into the colour version. It'll be the same process we've just done, except we'll be using pastels. But we will draw this up with either pastel pencil or a charcoal pencil, depending on what colour paper you've got. So today I thought I would use a piece of black paper because this colour, this beautiful teal turquoisey colour, looks amazing on black. But whatever you have will be fine. So don't worry about, whether it's right or wrong. It really doesn't matter that much. I just like the combination of the bright teal and the black. But any colour's fine. An aubergine or something like that would also be really lovely. So I'll just pop this drawing aside. So now we've had a rehearsal, we can kind of get into the next bit and we know it a little bit better now. Okay, so this is my piece of black paper. It's colour fixed paper and it feels a lot like very fine sandpaper. Wonderful for pastels. I had started to tape it down, but I can see now that it's slightly crooked. So I have a board. It's my little drawing board. It's a bit grubby, but it's really good to have a board that you can tape your paper onto. So I've got two sides taped down today, only because I just happened to do that this morning. I'm reusing my tape. So if you just want to tape down the corners of your page or all around, doesn't really matter, whatever you prefer, whatever's easiest for you. But it is good to tape it down because then you don't have to hold on to it and it stays still. And it's nice and flat, so it's good to do it onto a board. It's got a nice flat surface. Just put fingerprints all over that. Oh dear. Okay, so when you do pop your tape on, when you get a new piece of tape, this is not a new piece, but I'll just show you what I mean. So if I was putting a new piece of tape onto here, I would stick it onto my tablecloth or my clothing first, just to get some of the adhesive off, because sometimes it can tear your paper and you don't want that to happen. So I like to stick it onto something else first. So it's not too sticky, it's just sticky enough to hold it in place without tearing the paper. I've ruined a couple of paintings doing that because they've been stuck down for too long. And then when I've torn it off, it's torn this edge, but it's also torn off into the painting, and that's really quite sad. So try very hard not to stick it down too hard. Lovely. So next thing we want to do is roll up your page with your grid lines. So depending on what colour paper you're on will depend on what colour you want to use for your grids and your drawing. I'll use white so it's easier to see on the video. And I'm going to make a halfway line down through here and a halfway line across there. So this page measures slightly bigger than A4. It's 23 by 30 centimetres. A4 is 21 by nearly 30. So this picture is designed to fit onto an A4 page. So if that's what you have, that would be perfect. If not, then maybe you could mark out the size of an A4 page and work within those parameters, just so that you get your dimensions right. Okay. So if you have marked your paper like I have, and it's very easy to do because our fingers pick up every crumb of pastel and colour, and so we tend to just get it everywhere. Papers come in different colours as well, so you can get all kinds of colours in the colour fix. I'll just show you a few as an example. So I work in an art shop, so I have access to this and I tend to buy in bulk. But these are all the different colours, or some of, that you can get. Right, they're lovely. So, you know, you've got your beautiful goldy colours here. There's a rose pink, it's beautiful, so that's really nice. And that's an umber, I think. Don't know what this one's called, but it's a pale golden colour. Then you've got all your darks. I love the darks best. I really like working on dark paper. It's dark blue. So you can imagine, if you don't know what colour paper to use and this is your subject, you can kind of imagine what it might look like on all the different colours. I think it could actually look really nice on brown, wouldn't it? Because blue and, or, you know, these tealy greens and blues look beautiful on brown. That would be cool. Be nice on dark blue. Be okay on this one. This is called Storm Blue, I think. Well, that one is. And then we've got Aubergine and Elephant. So Aubergine is this is dark purple colour. That's really nice. So you can imagine that on here would be lovely. And Elephant is a little bit more grey. So, you know, it would work on pretty much anything, but I think a darker colour would be the best. Anyway, that's just a few of the colours that you can get. There's also lovely burgundy and black, of course, and white. So it's fun working on different coloured papers because then you can let the paper be part of your artwork. You know, you don't have to fill the whole thing up. So for instance, today the black can stay black and then we'll have this lovely tealy green colour cup on top. All right, if you've got your grid lines drawn in, now it's time to do the same thing we did before, and that is just to mark out where everything sits and draw it all in again. So remember, this is not a perfect circle. It's kind of slightly elongated. I'm going to check my theory on that. It looks like that to me anyway. Is that 11.5? Yeah, it is. Good. Not seeing things. So it's a slightly oval shape. It's definitely not a perfect circle. Otherwise, I would say go grab a plate, trace around it. You know, if you can cheat sometimes, it's a bit easier, isn't it? It's got shapes that you can trace around. Okay, so that's my saucer approximately. You can see I'm using a white charcoal pencil, and I'm just making quite light lines because at the end of this I will probably want to take them off, or with my kneadable eraser, and the harder you press, the harder it is to get it off. So I'm just pressing quite lightly because I want to be able to remove those extra marks easily if they're still obvious. So that's our wonky saucer, my wonky saucer. Don't worry if you can't get the shape perfect. I think it gives it a little bit more personality if it's a little bit, handmade. I'm going to say handmade because that sounds better. And then the cup. So we can draw the cup in again. Again, if you want to mark out, the areas where the cup crosses over the grid line, then do that. Even if you have to measure it, with your ruler or something, if that makes you feel better, then do it that way. So that's roughly where my cup will go. And then again, just breaking this up into segments. I might actually draw in where the coffee goes as well. So that's another circle inside the cup. So we can draw that in like that. Roughly. Just keep your lines loose and light. Loose and light. Then we've got our handle. So I'm in the bottom left-hand quarter. So I can draw in the shape of that. So it's basically a rectangle. It doesn't come all the way to the edge of the saucer. So it sits about there. It's a bit crooked, Jeannie. Sits about there. And then we've got the biscuits. So this biscuit comes out from under the handle. We can't see the other side of it. So it literally joins up with the handle, comes across here, wider than the saucer, and then in, like that, about that shape. And then the other biscuit starts about here. So we can see a bit of the saucer between the two bickies. And it comes around to about there. So that's our basic shape. That's the basic drawing sorted out, ready to go. Lovely. So the next thing we need to look at is our colour palette. And so what I'm going to do is put my colours here. I picked them out earlier for us, and they're on a little paper towel in a separate container. So I have quite a lot of pastels. So when I start a picture, I like to keep my set of pastels separate. But the ones that I'm working with, I keep them in a separate little container. That way they don't get put back in with my others, and I don't have to try and remember what I used. And it means that I've got all my palettes ready to go whenever I need to, pick up my pastels, which is the other awesome thing about pastels, because you can pick it up anytime. You don't have to let it dry, it doesn't go off. I can come back in a year's time and just pick up from where I left off. So that's the nice thing about it. There's no waiting period, and there's no setting, and you don't need mediums, you don't need any brushes, you just need your fingers and maybe a few pencils, and a blender if you can. I've worked for years and years without blenders or pencils. Charcoal is also great to use with pastels. So if you need to put a bit of shadow into something, the charcoal is a great thing to use. Or if you want to do some fine dark lines, charcoal again is a really good option. So I'll just run through these colours with you. I'm just going to find a bit of paper that I can put them onto to show you what they are. Find a bit of scrap paper. I was going to do it in my art diary, but I didn't leave myself any space around the drawing. Okay, So what I'm trying to do is figure out not only the colours, but the range from light to dark, because we need to have a nice range, and that's where the tones become important. So what I've got here is a blue violet. Now, if you've done my classes before, you'll know that that's one of my go-to favourites for my darks. It's a very dark purple that's beautiful for shadows. Doesn't look great on this paper because this is not pastel paper, so bear with me. Then I've got a brown. So, oh, that's a reddy brown. I might have to change that. I'll see how we go. I thought I had a brown. Now you can tell that, see how red that is when I've used it? They get really dirty. So when they sit around together, these pastels, they all pick up each other's colours. And sometimes it's hard to tell what it is until you give it a wipe or a clean. So that's a reddy brown. That might work, we'll see. I'm just thinking about this for the shadow in the coffee. So the dark section of the coffee. Might have to get a darker brown. This is my coffee colour. So that's a nice sort of tan sort of coffee colour. It's not exactly coffee colour, but it's near enough. Sometimes you just got to do what's near enough because we don't have every colour under the rainbow. It's also my biscuit colour, so that'll work for my bickies as well. What's next? Darkest. I'm just going from dark to light here. So blue, I thought this would be nice for most of the saucer and cup colours. And then I picked up some green. So I can see green in there, and the blue and the green mixed together will be really yummy. So there's green. I've got a bit of a light blue as well. That could be quite nice too. And purple is always lovely. I know you can't actually see purple in there, but if we mixed purple into the blues and the greens, I'll just show you what that might do. Get these beautiful shading, shadowy, sort of dark, interesting colours. So purple's always a good one to have for shadows. And then, of course, I've got white, which we'll use on the highlights. Hard to see on my white paper, but it is there. So that's basically my palette. Yeah, I'm going to rethink that reddy brown. I don't think that's the right colour. I'll see if I can find another brown. It's a bit browner than that. Sometimes you've got to test them to see. What's that one? That's better. Yep, that's better. So I'll use that instead, I think. Maybe I'll use both. Who knows? So pastels are mixed on the paper. They're not mixed in a palette, excuse me. So when you put them down on paper, you can layer them and blend them in and push them around and create really lovely combinations of colour. So I'm just thinking the brown and this lighter brown would be good for the bickies because the biscuits have a bit of texture in them. You know, you can see the creases and so forth. So that might be nice for the biscuits. And then, of course, I've got white, which will add our little bits of highlight in. Light blue for the lighter areas in the cup and the saucer. I've got the green and the purple for the shadows. So I think that'll be quite a nice little palette. All right, so there are our colours. And now we're going to start filling in the lines and creating this beautiful painting. Now, you might have just noticed when I tipped that up, there's a lot of dust. So pastels are very dusty. And I mentioned earlier that if you are working flat on a table, like I am, then you'll probably have to tip off the dust quite a lot. It's tempting to blow it away. And if you're outside or somewhere, then that's fine. But if you're inside, you're probably best not to blow it all over the house because it is very, very messy. Excuse me. I just had a big glass of water. All right. So let's get going. First, we're going to just put the blue or the green colour down wherever you can see that colour. So this is my main colour for my cup and saucer. It's a little bit bluer than the picture. Let me see. That's a little bit greener. So it's kind of in between both of those. So I'm just going to start with the blue, and then I can add green over the top. Now everybody's going to have a different colour. So we're going to try, you know, just to use whatever colour you've got. Don't worry about what I'm using or what doesn't match or whatever. We can just work with what you've got. If you have to make a pink cup, then make a pink cup. You might not have the same blues and greens, but any kind of blue, mid-tone blue would be fine. So I would say this is a mid-tone blue, because I can get a darker blue and I can get lighter. So this will be my mid. So when you're filling in an area like this, you just want to get a short stick of pastel. So most pastel sticks come quite long. So this is about a third of the size of a full stick. So I usually break them into pieces. So I've got shorter stumps, because then I can lie them down on my paper like this and fill in a bigger area a lot faster. See how just by pulling that around like that, I'm filling up much more area than if I was trying to colour it with a pointy end or a sharp end. So literally just going to put this wherever I can see the teal green kind of colour of the cup and saucer. So that would be all around on the saucer, like that. And just pull it, depending on what paper you've got too. So if you might have a paper that's not quite as gritty as this, so you might have more texture, might look a little bit more bumpy. But we can push it all in and blend it in. So we're going to do some really nice blending today and create some lovely variations of tones. So basically, that's what you need to do, is what I've just done there. Now I know I've lost my handle, I've covered that up, but that's okay, I can find that again. I know where it is, I've already put it in twice. That's the good thing about rehearsing the drawing, is you kind of start to get familiar with where things are within the picture. All right, so this is the blue, and I'm going to pop that aside for a minute, and I'm going to start to push it into the paper. So what I want to do now is, like we did with the charcoal, is pull your finger around in the direction the saucer or the item that you're doing is running, I suppose, for want of a better word. So when I say running, this is a circular, smooth item. So I want to do circular, smooth movements with my fingers. And can you see, as I'm pulling my fingers around, it's blending the pigment into the paper. So it's starting to look lovely and smooth. And I'm no longer getting that gritty kind of textured look, because I'm just pushing it all in and it's starting to blend in really nicely. So as I said before though, different papers will have different outcomes. Some will be bumpier than others, some will be smoother. As long as you've got pastel paper, that's the key. Make sure you've got proper pastel paper. If you're trying to do this on regular cartridge or drawing paper, you'll find that the pastels won't stick to it. It'll probably just all be dust and it won't hang on, and that's incredibly frustrating. So even if you can't afford good pastels, make sure you get the good paper, because it's the paper that makes all the difference. And it's the same with watercolour paper, or painting on canvases and stuff. You just got to get really good quality paper to get a good outcome. So what I've done is I've blended all that around in a big circular kind of shape with my finger. And the more I blend, so what I'm doing, I'm keeping my finger, you can see they're covered in blue now, I'm keeping it on the paper and literally running back and forth, around and around like this. So the reason I'm doing that is to create a continuous kind of blend of colour, rather than picking my finger up and putting it back down again. Because if I keep doing this like that, and that's what we tend to do, see how that's starting to make little fingerprints? I don't know if you can see, but what it does is it makes fingerprints, and it gives you broken lines and kind of uneven coverage. So the best way to get it even is to keep your finger flat on the paper and just keep running it around like this. You might feel you need to put more pastels more pastel on your paper. If you didn't put enough down before, then it might not be enough, or thick enough, or covering it enough. If that's the case, just grab your pastel again and wipe it over again. So you can do a few layers before the paper fills up, and just run that around where it's maybe a bit thin, or not quite enough colour. And then you can do the same thing again and just pull it around until it's all kind of blending in. Lovely, lovely, like that. Okay. See? And that gives you a beautiful, smooth kind of feel. And you can see I haven't filled in where the biscuits are going to go, but I have filled in around the edges of them, because what we don't want is to have like a gap or a space between the biscuits and the saucer or the cup. So if you make sure that you cover up the edges, then you'll get a nice continual kind of colour underneath them. And we'll go over the edges, so don't worry about that. It'll be fine. But you just need to make sure you cover those edges up a little bit so that we don't have a gap or a halo around it. So now I've done the saucer, I'm going to do the same thing with the cup area. So the middle will be brown for coffee or tea, whatever this is, but I still want to get the cup colour or shape in there. So pulling that around again, and I can see I might need to add a bit more pastel just to thicken that up a bit and cover my paper a bit more. So this is a beautiful blue. It's really nice. And again, just pulling it around. So if you pull it around, you'll create that lovely shape. And then when we start to add the shadows and the lights, it'll take on form and it'll begin to look like it's a solid object. Oops. Oh, just going to put a bit more there. So you'll see there'll be, sometimes you get patches that aren't quite as thick or filled as other areas. So you've just got to touch it up until you get it to how you want it. Basically, we have a nice blue circle with a hole in the middle. There we go. So the next thing we want to look at is the colours in the saucer. So we're focusing on the saucer first because that's the thing that's furthest away and it's underneath all the other things. So if you look at this in layers, you can see there's a saucer first because we're looking down on it. So it's at the back or behind or under the other things. Then we've got the bickies. So they're next in the queue. And then we've got the cup. So we've got to do them in that order. No, actually, we don't got to do anything, but that's the way I like to work, because if we do what's behind first and then build up to what's in front, it just means we haven't got to get in behind things to do them later. So for instance, if we hadn't done the saucer and we did the biscuits first, then you have to get in around the biscuits to get the saucer right. And because there are very subtle colour changes in there, be harder to do if we had to kind of work around a thing. But if we put the thing in afterwards and work on that section first, it just makes it a whole lot easier. So that's my theory, and that's my method, I suppose, for the order of which I want to work on this. So now I'm going to look at the saucer. Let's just study that saucer for a minute and check out where the light and the dark is. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we know the light's coming from the right. And so we've got a lot of shadow in this right-hand side because the saucer's dipping down and there's a shadow being cast on this side of the saucer and also on this side of the cup, on the inside of the cup. So it's darker here, and then it comes around, it gets brighter, and then it's a bit darker under the biscuits because they're also casting shadow. So you've got to think about the light. Where is the light? So first thing I want to do is put a bit of green in here. I don't know if you want to add green or not, but I feel like I want to add a bit of green to my cup just to change the colour a tad. So remember I said before, you might not have exactly the right colour to match what you want to do. So if that's the case, then you kind of got to figure out, how can I make it? How can I make that colour that I want. And the best way to do it is to just mix them on the paper. So I've just popped a bit of green over the blue, and I'm going to push them around and see what I think about that. And I think that's quite nice. You can see I've got quite a bit of dust now. So the green pastel is obviously more chalky or dry than the blue one. See how that's creating a lot more dust than what I had before. So you'll find different pastels have different texture, different feel. Some are crummier or drier than others. Some are really creamy and soft. The creamy ones are beautiful, but they fill the paper up very quickly. Whereas these drier ones, you can tend to get a few more layers on. Now, I'm not going to put green all over this, but I really like the kind of, I don't know, blending that's going on here with a touch of green and a touch of blue, and how they're sort of playing nicely together. So that's kind of fun. Cool. Sorry, I just needed to do that because I wanted to put some green in. That's why I grabbed it initially. Let me tip some dust off here. So I've got a little cloth next to me, and what I do is just pick up my ball and I bang it on the cloth, and that tips all the dust off, or most of it. So now I've got you know, no dust in the way. Okay, back to the shadow. So you can see on the right side there of the picture that there's shadow. So what I've got my blue violet. This is my dark, or it might be a red violet. There's a blue violet and a red violet. They're both violet or purple based, and they make beautiful shadow colours. So I'm just going to sweep this around here really lightly. I don't want to put too much down because that might be too dark. If I put a little bit on now, then I can add a bit more later if I need to. I'm also going to put some over here in between the biscuits on that little bit there because there's shadow there too. Okay, so just lightly, I've just swept it over lightly. I don't want to darken it too much. And now I'm going to pull this around again, do the same kind of movement with my finger on this side only, just to get that lovely shadow happening. See how that's now creating a lovely little shadow. So I begin to see the dip in the saucer and where the light might be coming from. If I just slightly darken up this side. Can you see how that now looks like it's a solid object? Because I've put a little shadow on one side of it. And the way I ran my finger around, it's kind of been, it drags the pigment or the pastel around and around and creates this really nice shadowy effect. Cool. Now, if you look at that and think, oh, I think I want that a bit darker actually, because I know I do. I really like the drama of the light and the dark. So I'm going to put a bit more, just checking back at your picture all the time to make sure you've got your shadows in the right spot. It's definitely darker here at about 2 o'clock. If this was a clock, imagine you're up at about 2 o'clock and it's a lot darker right in that area there. So I'm going to put a bit more of my blue violet or red violet down on there and pull it around again. But what I want to do is pull it a little bit less this time so that it stays darker and I'm not kind of merging it in too much to my other colours. So that's working nicely. There we go. Like that. Now, I know my sauce is not completely perfectly round and I don't really care that much. I kind of like that it's a little bit wonky and handmade. All right, so that's now created a really lovely little shadow on that right side. Do I want it to be darker, even darker? Let me see. Maybe I do. If no, let's not do that. Let's pop in a little bit of light. Remember I picked up a lighter blue before? So what I want to do now is find the lighter areas. So it's not super light, but there's definitely kind of a lighter greeny blue section, just probably off to the left side of the saucer. I'm just looking at the saucer. We're not worrying about the cup yet. Just in there. So if you very lightly just sweep over a little bit of light blue, and it doesn't matter what kind of blue you've got. And then we'll do the same thing. You might want to wipe your finger off. If you've got dark stuff on your finger, you might need to give that a little wipe and dry it, and then you'll be able to push in the light colours. I'm just going to use another finger instead. And so this isn't going to brighten it right up, but it just gives it that real subtle, tiny little bit of lightness, just a little bit, because it's not super obvious. It's just very subtle. And it just, I don't know, helps to make it feel more textured, I think. Yeah. That's quite nice. Quite nice. Okay. And I'm just going to run a little bit more of my light blue around here, if I can see, just through here. Now, the other thing I'm thinking about while I'm doing this is the little handle on the cup. It's the same colour as the saucer and the cup. But what I want it to do is sort of stand out a little bit on top of this saucer. So if I make this section slightly lighter, and if you look at your black and white picture on your notes, you'll see that under here, under this section here, under where the handle sits, is a little bit lighter than the actual handle, or parts of it. The handle's got a couple of different tones in it. So what we need to do is prepare for that. Make sure that we've got this in the right tone so that when we put the handle over the top, which will go at about here, and by the time we put a bit of shadow and light into it, it should kind of pop up and sit on top of the saucer rather than get lost inside it. I've just noticed though, while I'm talking to you, that there's a tiny bit of shadow right there on the saucer. Can you see that? Just in there. I'm going to put that there too, because that's going to help the handle to look like it's above the saucer. Yep, a little bit of shadow right there. Cool. And then the saucer has shadow too. So it's got shadow, or not the saucer, the handle has shadow where it meets the cup. So we haven't put the cup in properly yet. But there's shadow there on the inside. And then there's shadow here. I've got lots of dust I need to tip off. Kind of getting in the way a little bit. Shadow there on the outside. A bit hard to see just yet what I'm doing. What I'll do is I'll mark in, if you want to do this as well, just mark in the edges with the light blue. So I've just picked up the light blue, only so I can see where I am with this. Although the outside edge here has a bit of a shine on it. And so I'm just using that to kind of put my handle back in. So if you want to do the same thing, so just draw a little triangle. And sometimes you just accidentally put the right, colour somewhere and it works. And it's like, oh, magic. How did that happen? So I'm trying to be accidental, but I'm not really. I'm looking at the lights on the little handle. So you can see on the very edge of it, on the outside edge of it, there's a shine. That's where it's kind of turning away or curling away from us. So if you touch your lighter pastel on that section there, it should give it hopefully that little bit of a turn or a shine. There's also a little shine on the bottom section of the handle. So imagine it's got a loop in it that you put your finger through. And on that bottom bit, down in here, there's a little shine just there. So you could pop that in there and that will hopefully look like it's a solid 3D object. So that was just a quick short bit about what happens when you add the light to things and the shadows. I better put a bit of green in that too because it's the same sort of colour as my saucer. So I'm going to add a bit of green in there, gently smoosh that in. And so as we work towards the surface and build up the colours, then you start to blend less. So that's technically what I've done on this section here. I haven't blended it quite as much. Like I put the blue down first and then I kind of pushed that in to get it to stick. And then I added some of the shadow. So I'm going to pop a bit more shadow in here, in this bit here, because that's where it meets the cup. So there's got to be more shadow cast just right there where it joins onto the cup. So I've used my blue violet to do that, and just put it down softly with your fingers and then grab it, the pad of a finger, and just pull it out gently. So pull it out from the middle towards the outside, but not too far because you don't want to make it all dirty and shadowed all the way back. So I probably exaggerated it a little bit there, but that's all right, I'll get around with it. And then there's a little bit of shadow just on the edge there, so where the handle turns away. And again, you can just softly dab that with your fingers. So there's lots of different ways to blend and dab colours in. And it's all about, you know, how you use your fingers, whether you pull the colour around or whether you dab it in gently so it kind of sticks to the paper but doesn't blend with everything else. Or if you just put colour down and then very lightly wipe over it so that it just sits on the surface and doesn't sink in too far. So there's all different gestures and motions that you can use to get different effects. So right now, I've just picked up my blue violet. I've noticed there's a little shadow around the edge of the saucer there. See around that side? And it kind of goes around and then up slightly just above the biscuit on the left there. Just on the outer edge, there's a slight shadow. And that's because the edge of the sauce is tucking away underneath and it's not catching the light. So I've just put a light line through there and I've only pressed quite lightly. And what I'm going to do now is just run my finger around in the same direction as the saucer and gently blur that off a little bit because I just want to soften off that line and blend it in slightly, but not pressing too much. If you press really hard, you'll just make like a muddy kind of colour and it gets all dirty looking. So it's all practice. It's about how hard you press and, you know, what happens when you do different pressure and stuff like that. All right, so what we're going to work on next, we've done the saucer and we might pop a bit of light actually just on this right hand side. I'm going to use my light blue and then I might add white if I want it to be brighter right at the end. I like to save my white for last. And then I've still got kind of an extra lighter light if I need it. But I'm going to use my light blue just along here. So this is the very edge of the saucer. So that'll be where the light's catching it, getting a little shine on it, like we did on the handle here. So I've just, again, done a very fine line. Give your fingers a wipe so try not to get too much dark stuff in there. And then again, just pull it around carefully, gently, lightly, like that. Beautiful. And that's a little shine on the edge of your cup. Messed up that side a little bit. If you mess it up, you can just go over it with your previous colour, like the blue or green or whatever you used. See? And just push it in, and then I can add another touch of light over the top. So pastels are very forgiving. You can kind of redo things a few times until you get it right. So don't think, you know, it's not like, I think that's why I'm afraid of what, I'm not afraid, but I'm not good at watercolour or oil, because watercolours you've got to kind of plan ahead, and once you've done something you can't undo it. And oils you've also got to plan ahead, and it takes forever to dry, and you know, wait for ages, and oh, I'm too impatient. So this is perfect. because if I muck it up, I can just change it, fix it. So it suits my personality, and I like the immediacy of it. I don't have to wait for anything. And it's really quick. Pastels are quick. You can get a lot done in a short time. Okay, so that's my very jagged edge of my saucer there. There's a bit of dust sitting on there as well. It's not perfectly round, but I don't mind, that's fine. Now we're going to do the biscuits, and then we'll do the cup. Okay, so we're going to kind of work from back to front. So the first biscuit, we've got the handle going on, that's all good. First biscuit sits around here. I think I put my handle around too far. Oh well, that's okay. Sits around there. Yeah, I did. Never mind. So that's about where the first bicky sits. I've just marked that out in my light brown kind of colour. And then we've got the other biscuit. So if you've put your handle in the right place, then your bicky will start under your handle like it does in the picture. But if you've done it like me, then it might start slightly higher. That's okay. Really doesn't matter that much. And, you know, it's a good exercise in improvising if you did get it in the wrong spot. So we'll do this one first because it's underneath. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill this all in with this orangey brown colour, because I reckon that's about the right colour for these biscuits. And you can see I'm just going over all the blue saucer area that we put down before. And what I want to do is try and get a nice clean edge between the biscuit and the saucer. And that was why I overlapped all my colours. And I'm going to do that here too, just inside here where the cup's going to go, just to make sure that we get, you know, a nice overlap of colours and no gaps in between. So I've put one layer of that colour down. Now I've put it down, I'm going to blend it in. And you'll find when you blend it in that it's going to pick up the browns or the whatever you've got underneath, blues and greens underneath. And it'll mix with your biscuit colour. And it'll probably go a weird browny colour like mine has, green almost. That's okay. I'm not too concerned actually. I don't mind that that's doing that because I can kind of use that as part of my shadows and things. When you get to the edge of your biscuit, when you're blending it, just try to keep the pad of your finger on the inside so that you're not blurring the edges too much. It's tricky. It takes a bit of practice to get pretty precise with that. Now, where's this other brown got to? Okay. So now I've got this darker brown, so I'm going to pop that probably over some of it, nearly all of it, just a light, application. Don't put too much down, because then we want to, once you've done that, and I've just wiped a little bit of my darker brown over that, just going to kind of blend it in. Now, biscuits are a different texture, aren't they? These are lumpy and bumpy and homemade, like my saucer. So I'm going to do these little squiggly kind of movements with my finger now because I've got dark brown on light brown. So if I do these little kind of almost organic movements or shapes, see how that starts to look sort of lumpy and bumpy, rather than doing those big smooth sweeping blending movements. I'm just going around and I'm not pressing very hard, so I'm keeping my touch quite light and just wiggling it around, squiggling, wiggling, I don't know what the word is, something like that. And it's starting to look textured like a biscuit, and that's what we want. We want that look. So now I've got one layer on there. I'm going to pick up the light colour again, so that's the lighter brown that I used initially, because I can see on this side of the biscuit here, this bottom edge is lighter because it's catching the light from over here on the right. Yeah. So I want to lighten that up a little bit. I'm also going to do a few more wiggly bits in here. So just kind of a few things like that to try and get some bumps and lumps into my bicky. And then I'm going to pick up my blue violet or my red dark, just call it dark, to get some shadow in there. So remember we said there's shadow on that top side of the bicky and underneath the other one. So I'm just putting a bit of dark in there. I'm going to do a few little creases and crinkly bits like that with my dark pastel. And now I'm just going to kind of dab most of that, because if I blend it, it'll all turn to mud. So because I want to retain the texture of the biscuit, just kind of dab that in instead. And see how we've got this very gentle blend of the light side over into the dark. So that was what I was trying to achieve, basically. And it worked out okay so far. You'll find, you get to a point where you can't get any more pastel onto the paper. So just make sure you put it down sparingly. I'm just putting a bit of white. I know I said I was saving white for last, but I'm going to blend this in a little bit. Just want to lighten up that edge slightly, just to emphasize the brightness. So I've just put a little bit of white on here, on the edge of my bicky. And I'm just touching it on. See, I'm just touching it on really lightly. I don't want to press hard or put too much on. And then I can just dab it gently, push it in, and it doesn't stay bright white then. It kind of merges with the other colours, but it's still got that lovely light touch to it. I'm just going to make a few more little creases in there just to get a bit more emphasis on the texture. And that'll do for one biscuit. So then we can do the next one. So same sequence, kind of just fill this up with your pastel. And I'm pressing fairly reasonably firmly just to get the colour down this time. And it overlaps that bicky there, so it comes across the top of it. Okay, so that's that one. And again, we can blend all this in, so I can push all this in. And it's picking up the blue and the green from underneath, but that's okay because it'll match the other one now. This one's a little lighter, it's got more light on it. So we'll put that in a minute. I'm just blending this through, and again doing little wiggly movements with your fingers. So you don't want to do big smooth movements because this is a lumpy thing that we're making. It's lumpy and bumpy. Okay. Now on the outside, can you see on the edge of this bicky, it kind of comes like that, and you can see the side of it sort of just here. So what I'm doing, I've got my, what is this? Blue violet, I think, dark. I'm just putting a little bit of it on the edge there because I want to make it look like it's 3D. And I also want to pop some shadow here because there's still shadow on that section of the biscuit. So now I can kind of push this in just lightly. Push that in lightly. And see how we've created this feeling of one on top of the other now. I might just darken that off a little bit more under there. I feel like I need to go and get a darker one. Yeah, it's wrong colour, that's why. This one, that's better. It's my dark. So just putting a bit more shadow in there because I want that to have a bit more contrast. And then this one can come around here and kind of lighten up that side, and then it turns dark so that the edge of that biscuit is kind of darker around here. And then it's the same as the other one. There's a few little, you know, creases and wrinkles and bumps and things through there. So I'm just doing that with my little brown pastel. Just trying to do some little random lines like that. And then I can push those in gently. Just put them in with little wiggly movements with your fingers so that you're not pushing it in too much. So you're still keeping some of the texture there. And I think I want to lighten this one up too on this side. So I'm using white, and I'll blend that in so it won't be as white as that in a minute. I'm just going to lighten up this part of the bicky because it's catching the light on that side. And gently push it in. I think it needs a bit of yellow or something. The white's a little bit too flat. I'll just grab some yellow. Try this one. It's a nice yellow. So that's a bit warmer. Yeah. A bit warmer than white. Sometimes white just seems a bit kind of flat and it's not bright. It's just takes the brightness or the warmth out of things. And often when you are putting light into something, often a yellow or a lemon is a much nicer option. Okay, so that'll do for the bickies. I know this one's not quite. Just going to lighten up that little bit there. Need a bit more texture in that one. A few more bumps and lumps and crunchy bits. Okay, so now we've got to look at putting the cup in. So we'll do that next. So back to our original blue colour that we used and the cup. So I can't see it on the top of the blue, so I'm just going to use this lighter. I might just try charcoal actually. Charcoal's a good option if you need to put lines or things back in. So what I did was I went kind of over the lines here and I overlapped a little bit because I wanted everything to merge nicely. So what you want to do now is draw in the circle of your cup again. I'm just using charcoal because charcoal is lovely and soft and it will blend in with the pastels. So I'm going to come out that way a little bit more. I have trouble with my top right, obviously. It's never quite round enough. There we go. So that'll be my cup section. So what we want to do once you've drawn that in, make sure you've kind of overlapped your bickies and your handle so everything's going to match up and join up neatly and smoothly. And so we want to fill in that area with the blue or the green or whatever you used for your base colour for the saucer. And then it's about figuring out how do we get this to sit out on top of the saucer if they're the same colour. And it'll be a study of the tones again. So remember, and also the light and the dark. So the left side of the inside of the cup has more light on it, and the inside on the right is darker. And the rim on both sides has light. So I've just put my blue down. I'm going to run my fingers around that now. Again, seeing these beautiful, big, wide, sweeping, smooth, blending movements now, because this is not a lumpy, bumpy thing, it's a smooth thing. So we want to do smooth movements. Lovely. There's a lot of dust on there, so I'm going to tip that off. Okay, so I've got some blue down, and now I'm going to add a bit of the green because I want the green to be the same as the saucer. So I'm just going to put a bit of that over the top like this. This is a really nice green. Okay, I've left the middle empty because we're going to put the coffee in there. So again, but make sure you overlap so that when we put the coffee in, we're going to have blue or green underneath the edge of it because we've got to have a nice smooth edge. You don't want a gap between the two. So that's now beginning to be the rim or the top of my cup. So now when you really need to look at this and think, okay, where's the shadow on this guy? And it's the same place as the saucer. It's on the right. So inside the rim or inside the cup, we have shadow. So if you put your dark colour around through there and then pull it around like I'm doing now, and you just want to wipe it on lightly. You don't want to put too much on there. Just want to get a lovely little shadow happening. And then when we put the coffee in, we've got the other shadow inside there too. That'll be the moon shape inside the coffee. I feel like I've got too much charcoal dust or something sitting on there. Just got to tip that off. Okay. So we're starting to form the cup now. And it's starting to kind of make some sense and come together. I'm just going to use some charcoal to get some darks back in here. So remember we had the dark on the handle and the shadow there. So I'm going to put a bit more of that through there. And then just around the edge of the cup above the biscuits, I can still see the bickies through there. So I probably need to add a bit more blue or green to thicken that up a bit more. And then I'm going to make a circle for my coffee, which would be come out fairly large actually. Again, I'm just making loose marks about where the coffee will be. So based on that information, I need to get some more of my blue or green down on the left-hand side, just to lighten it up a little bit and cover up some of the brown from the biscuits. Okay, so I've got some green there. I'm going to add a bit of blue. No, pastels will actually blend with each other just by using the stick. You don't always have to use your fingers to blend them. Okay. Around like that, and then I'm just going to pull that around again. So do that beautiful, big, sweeping, endless blend. You get that lovely. See now, see how that's now catching the light on the left side? That's nice. And then we want to tip off the dust again. So now I've got my light blue. So this is the light that I want to put in. Remember, this is the one we used for the highlights. And I can see there's a line of light blue or highlight just here. And then there's another sort of broken one inside there. It's a little softer. There's also one on the edge of the coffee, but we'll do that last, once we get the coffee in. But this one here, it's catching the edge of the cup. I think it needs to be a bit more defined around the edge there. So I'm going to put a bit more blue here. To get a sharper edge or a more defined edge, I'm just going to press a little bit harder and try and do a nice smooth kind of line around through there. By pressing harder, the pastel will usually kind of stick a bit better. again, depending on the kind of pastel you've got. Okay, so then I'm going to pull that through again. So just gently, gently pull it through. I'm pressing a little lighter now because I actually want that blue to stick to the surface and dominate, be the edge of the cup. I'll get the dust off. Yes, I want it to be the edge of the cup. I want it to kind of be a bit sharper. It's tricky getting sharp edges with pastels when you're doing this kind of thing. That's where pencils come in very handy. If you have pencils, you can get some really good sharp edges with them. They're great for fine work and for outlines and stuff. I'll pull that around a bit more. There we go. Put that in my bicky, so now my bicky went too smooth on the end. I have to dab it a little bit and roughen it up. Okay. I think the edge of my cup is getting very wide here, but never mind. So I'm going to put another shine on there with my light blue again. So I'm just going to bring it around here because it's not exactly on the very outside. It's just inside the edge of the cup. About there. And then I'm just going to pull that through softly, softly. And so I know that, you know, if I wanted to, for instance now, I could pick up my little white one, my little white pastel, and I can brighten it up in a couple of spots and get that a lot lighter. And if it's too light, then you just run your finger across it and soften it off a little bit more. Now on the other side, we also have a shine, but it's on that outer edge of the cup. So I'm using my light blue again. I'm hoping that this is the right part of the edge. Because what I want to do is I want to make that kind of sit forward on top of the saucer. So it's got to be a different, slightly different colour or tone to, you know, bring it up like that. Looks very handmade, doesn't it? Terribly wonky. That's okay. So that's just my light blue. I haven't put white on there. I may do that. But now that's starting to bring the cup up from the saucer because now we've got the lighter edge against the dark of the saucer. So it's starting to make sense and kind of come forward. Just putting a bit more shadow into the side here because it is quite dark in there as it sinks down towards the coffee. Lovely. All right, so we're getting there. Okay. So now what we want to do is put the coffee in there. Where's my coffee colour? So this is my coffee colour. It looks fairly light, but we can get some more tone into there and darken it up a little bit. On the right-hand side, it's much darker. So we'll put some dark brown or your blue violet or whatever you're using in there afterwards. But for now, I just want to make sure we get this nice and rich and filled up. So what I'm doing is I'm using the pastel on its side again to cover a wider area. You also get a more even kind of mark when you do this. So it's kind of fills up better. Oops, just went outside the lines a little bit, made it bigger. Okay, so that's basically, I've got a very wonky cup. That's basically my coffee. or tea. So now what we want to do is blend this in. Just get a finger and run it around and around in a circle. Get that lovely smooth surface happening. Because this is not lumpy like a biscuit, it's smooth and flat. Kind of glad there's no patterns in there, because imagine trying to draw a leaf or whatever they put in coffees. Must be tea. So now we've pushed all that in. So now it's looking really, well, nearly really smooth. Not quite. Okay, so I'm just going to tip off my dust again. And I feel like I need to add a bit of brown to this just to make it a bit more tea-ish looking. I'm not going to put much on because I don't want it to get too dark there. But I do want to just get that yellow out of it a little bit more. So this is where, again, mixing colour on the paper is fun, because you can, you know, just experiment. See how that's gone a bit darker now? So it's not looking quite as yellow. So if you haven't got the exact colour in your pastel set, you know, you can always have a go at making it. It's quite fun. Well, I think it's fun. Now I know this side of my cup looks narrower than that side, and it is because I've probably got the drawing a bit out of whack. So I can widen this one up a little bit more, but when I darken on the other side, it'll all sort of merge in together because the coffee and the cup are both in shadow. So I can kind of lose my edges a little bit over there, and hopefully it won't be quite so obvious. There we go. Still not looking like the right colour. What else can I put in there? I'll try a bit of this red, reddy brown. See what that does. Yeah, maybe. Interesting. So see how I'm just keeping this as smooth as I can to try and make sure we get a nice flat surface. Tip off the dust. We're nearly there. All right. So what I want to do now is I'm going to settle for that colour. I think that'll be fine. You could always add a bit more brown, or, you know, you might have the perfect colour already. I'm sure I have somewhere over there in my collection. But this will do for now. It's always good to try and find colours, make them. It helps you get a better understanding too of how colours work. And, you know, obviously this brown has a bit of a red base to it, so I'm getting a lot of red coming through. But that's all right. It's nice with the blue. Okay, so now what we want to do is put some shadow over on that right-hand side. So remember, we've got that lovely moon crescent kind of shape that comes around like that in the coffee. So that's a shadow being cast by the cup itself. And then the cup is also dark inside there. So we can put that colour on both those spots. And then do the same kind of thing, just blend it around. So what I'm trying to do is kind of merge the edge of the cup with the coffee so that you can't really see where one begins and one ends. And create that lovely shadow effect. I've got a lot of dust on there, so I'm going to tip that off. Pull that back around there. So if you do have dust, you might find it kind of gathers or pools in one spot, and you need to keep kind of trying to get rid of it, tipping it off all the time. And then darken this up again. So I might just try the dark brown actually through here. It's quite dark in there, and it's nice to have that contrast from dark to light. And again, in the coffee section, you can just kind of press a little bit firmer and pull it around so you get a really nice blend. My cup is so out of whack. It's far too wide down here. I could try to make the tea or coffee bigger. Bring that out a bit more. Let's see if that'll work. It's looking slightly better, isn't it? Okay. So I'll just widen that a little bit. So see how forgiving pastels are? You can kind of just go over things a bit more or change them slightly. Cool, cool. Good, good. There we go. Now that's looking better. Just I'll tip off the dust again. Okay. So we're nearly there. The last thing we need to do is get a little bit of light into the coffee. So you can see inside the coffee on the left side here, there's some like little bubbles just here. I'm not going to try and do those too much. But there's a shiny line around the rim of around the edge of the liquid here. I'm using blue to start with, just to mark it out gently, and then I can come in and brighten that up a little bit with some white. I'm going to pull my finger around, softly merge that sort of lightly like that. Gone a bit green now, but that's okay. Just go over it with, it's very scratchy now. Some pastels are really scratchy and they kind of dent the paper sometimes. It's no fun. Okay, so I'll lighten that side up a little bit more. I feel like I want to brighten the coffee up for tea a tad. Sorry, it's going to pop a bit of yellow in here, see what happens. I don't know about yellow. Anyway, softly push that in, so just gently, gently. I'm still trying, always working on the shadows and the light. You know, it's important to notice that all the time. Lights and darks and shadows and the shiny bits. Okay, so I'll have to put the shine back in the coffee. I just feel like it's looking a little bit something, I'm not sure what. I'm just going to put some brown through here. And I need to, again, darken up that right side. See how, by adding the brown, what's happened is I've made the colour darker. And so now the dark side that I wanted to be nice and dark doesn't look dark enough because I've darkened the whole thing too much probably. So I'm going to have to put more dark on that right side. That was just mucking around trying to find the right colour. That's better. It's looking better. And then I can just put this dark back in here. With my blue violet, red violet. There we go. That's looking better. And then just gently, just lightly blend that, because if I push too hard, it'll just kind of go dull and muddy again. Just lightly push that around. There we go. Now we're getting a nice shadow in there. Tipping off the dust again. Good. And now I can put my little bit of light on my coffee. I'm going to use a pencil because you actually have more control when you want to do the fine lines. So this is actually a charcoal pencil. You can get white charcoal, believe it or not. And I love it. It's the best thing ever. Sometimes it's actually better than a pastel pencil because it seems to hold on a bit better. It's not quite as chalky. So that's giving me a nice little shine on the edge of my coffee right there. And so that's our little coffee cup or mug of tea, whatever we've got. I think it's tea. I've got to stop saying coffee. While I've got this in my hand, I'm just going to brighten up a couple of other light spots because I can. And it just is nice to have some shiny bits here and there. I'll just go around the edge of my saucer. So as I said, pencils are good. You've got a bit more control if you want to get the fine lines happening, even though they're wonky ones. And I can pop a bit more white on here, just on this edge. And then that little shine on my handle, I wanted to put under there. So that's caught that nicely. And then also on the biscuit, if I wanted to lighten that up a little bit more, I should probably get a very pale yellow, but I'll just use white for now to lighten up that edge there because that's quite bright. I'm just going to wipe that over here to continue on the light from there. Sharpen up the edge of my cup. So just at the end, you want to sharpen up some edges and touch up a few bits and bobs and maybe add a little bit of light or dark or something. And there you have it. 1 cup of tea. Must be time for tea, I reckon. Lovely. So I hope you have enjoyed today's class and learned something. I always love doing this one because it's pretty simple, but it's always very effective and looks fabulous on a dark paper. So please send me your photos if you have done this one, and I would love to see them and see how you went. And look forward to seeing you again. There's still things on here I want to fix up. Make that a bit wider. Anyway, I shall go and leave you with it. Bye for now.